right, welcome back everybody to another segment of Beyond the Checkride. I'm here again as usual with Kent Shook. How you doing, Kent?
Excellent.
Good.
It's always a good day when I can talk about flying.
Always is. Always is. So I know I introduced these segments a few episodes ago, and we're going to continue to release those, as I said, as segments within the Student Pilot Cast. But I wanted to make a comment on it today just to kind of set the stage a little more for, what these are all about. We certainly don't want to give the impression that these are, sort of the gospel truth about how you do any of these things. And they're certainly not comprehensive in what we're covering. We're mostly wanting to bring these topics up because especially Kent and a little bit me, we've had some experience in aviation and we found some things that we've learned over time that certainly aren't in the ACS or what used to be the PTS. And they aren't required knowledge to get a certificate or a rating or, things like that, but they are practically important knowledge. And these are things that we've learned since our check rides, and we're kind of trying to bring up that question and disseminate the information so that we can start a discussion in the overall community about these things. And so we always want to hear feedback. I know that we've harped on that quite a bit. We always want to get feedback from you. We want to hear stories about how you've learned things beyond your own check rides. And this is really to open up the conversation. We're going to talk about our experiences, our stories, the things that we've run into and so on. And we want everyone to add to that conversation. Anything to add to that, Kent? I just wanted to make sure we were setting the stage.
Yeah, that sounds great. And, I hope that eventually we'll have enough feedback that we can even have a segment within a segment where we go through feedback every time and talk about it a little more. Like I said, I like to talk about flying. So that's just another way to do it and to expand the size of our little circle around the fire at the hangar, right?
That's right. That's right. Cool. So with that being said, what topic have you got for us today?
Well, this time, kind of the overarching thing will be the regulations. And within that, we're going to look at one that I have seen so many online arguments and confusion about, and that is logging time.
Great
I'm,
topic.
I'm sure you've seen an argument or two over that in your day.
Oh, for sure.
So, over the years, I've actually gotten to the point where the regulations actually make sense to me. Don't tell the FAA or they'll probably revoke my medical for being crazy or something like that. But,
Right.
um,
There's got to be
I've,
something wrong with you, right?
yes, yes. And one of the people that I learned a lot from was a guy by the name of Ron Levy, who was a participant in many of those arguments ages ago, but he actually taught a class at a college. I can't remember where it was, but he was out in Maryland. So somewhere out in that vicinity, he was a guy who taught a college class in aviation law. So knew what he was talking about, always backed up his statements. And then by following all the references that he provided, I learned a lot about it myself. So I've learned from those online discussions that I've had quite a bit. Really, it's all about going and finding references for your position. And so sometimes I will learn that I was right, and sometimes I'll learn that I was wrong. And
It's all still learning, right?
exactly.
So what are
Um,
some of the big issues that, I mean, the obvious one is, logging PIC when you're doing instrument practice, but we'll hold off on that one for a second, hopefully. Are there any other big logging issues that you run into?
well, there's a couple. There is the can more than one person log PIC at the same time, or even log the time at all at the same time. The other one is okay, I'm going up with an instructor and I'm getting my complex endorsement. How do I log that? Um, so I guess we
Right,
can we can
right. Can
cover.
you log PIC when you don't have a high performance endorsement, for example, or
Right.
something along those lines in a high performance environment? Yeah. Okay, good question. I think I
Okay,
know the
so
answer to that, actually.
yeah,
But
the first thing here is don't try to make it make sense. If you try to make it make sense right off the bat, you'll say, what on earth is going on? And it won't make any sense.
these are
So,
federal regulations, after all.
yes, yes. If you sit back and wait until the end, hopefully by the time we're done tonight, then it will make sense. So, the first thing to understand is that to the FAA, logging PIC and being the PIC are completely separate things. When I say being the PIC, we'll also use the term acting as the PIC. That doesn't
Right.
mean acting like you're not really it. Acting PIC is the person who is being or acting as the pilot in command of the aircraft. There is always one and only one pilot in command of an aircraft, period, end of story. However, there are times when you can have, I'll put an asterisk on the first one here, but 0 up to 3 people logging PIC. So don't let me forget that. We'll cover what those are here at the end, and it'll make a little more sense. So first thing, let's talk about how you can look this stuff up on your own. And in fact, I will see if I can share my screen here. All right, so here in my browser window, you'll see we have gone to ECFR.gov. So Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. And what we're looking for here is Title 14, Aeronautics and Space. So let's click on that. And this is an awful lot of stuff because this is everything dealing with the FAA and NASA and all kinds of things. So pretty much everything that you're going to want in terms of aviation regulations is going to be in this first chapter here, Chapter 1. So I'll expand that. And for logging stuff, one of the things that you should have learned right away as a student pilot is that anything that depends on who the pilot is going to be in Part 61. And then general operating rules are Part 91. So let's go to subchapter D here where Part 61 is. Now, there's a difference between whether you click on Part 61 or the title over here. So if you click on the left, you'll get the table of contents. If you click on the right, you'll get the entire part. And that is generally what I do. So let's go ahead and do that. So here we go. This is Part 61. Everything in Part 61. Now, I happen to know that it's 6151 is what we're looking for. But you can also just do a quick find for logging. So you can see C, D, and E there. I'm going to scroll back up. So there we go. 6151, pilot logbooks. So which question shall we address first here? Well, let's do the scenario where, let's say you just got your private pilot certificate and you want to add on something like a complex or high performance endorsement.
Yep. That's a good one.
So
Good, simple one.
now this is all, we're talking PIC right now. So 6151E is where we talk about PIC. So logging pilot and command flight time. A sport, recreational, private, commercial, or airline transport pilot may log pilot and command time for flights. And this is the one that really matters here right off the bat. Except when logging flight time under 61159C, when the pilot is the sole manipulator of the controls of an aircraft for which the pilot is rated or has sport pilot privileges for that category and class of aircraft, if the aircraft class rating is appropriate. So that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Let's pick that apart. So except when logging flight time under 61159C. I happen to know that that is all about the what's called a second in command professional development program. So that's something that Part 135 operators can use if they have the op spec for it, and it changes things a little bit. So if you're part of one of those SIC PDPs, kind of skip everything we're going to tell you, because the SIC PDP takes precedence over basically all of the other logging rules. Now, if you don't already know that, well, what do you need to do? You need to go and look at what 61159C says. So let's go ahead and click on that and do that. And you can see when you click on it, this website highlights the section. A commercial pilot may log second in command pilot time toward the aeronautical experience requirements of paragraph A of this section, blah, blah, blah. Employed by a Part 119 certificate holder, authorized to conduct operations under Part 135 of this chapter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So none of that is applicable to the scenario that we're in here. So you don't need to read these little subsections at all. This just simply isn't applicable.
So that whole exception that you read in 6151E, it just doesn't pertain to our scenario anymore. They're not in one of those programs.
Exactly. So
Okay.
now I need to find it again. Okay, so here we are, 6151E. So this exception here does not apply. Now, let's pick apart the rest of this. There's this or. Or has sport pilot privileges, blah, blah, blah. We're talking about somebody who just got their private pilot certificate. So that means this whole section is irrelevant as well.
Yep. Skip on over.
So what that means is that effectively our person who is just a private pilot, you know, they're working on some flight training, all under Part 91. So when the pilot is the sole manipulator of the controls of an aircraft for which the pilot is rated. Uh-oh. What does that mean? Here's something that you'll find throughout the regulations. They don't leave a whole lot of ambiguity in the regulations. So let's see if we can find out, what does rated mean? And where we find that is you can always kind of peel the onion on this stuff. So definitions relative to Part 61 only are always going to be up in 61.1. So if we scroll way back up to the top, it actually isn't completely at the top because there are a couple of special federal aviation regulations up here, but here we go. Applicability and definitions. That's what you'll find in the point 1 of pretty much every part. So what we want to look up here is look up rated or rating. And it's not here, right? So next, let's peel the onion. Let's go out to subchapter D, airman. Well, nothing really there, because the first part in subchapter D is this flight simulation training device, etc. That's not really applicable. So peel the onion again. And, I must have clicked on something there that I didn't really mean to, because this is what I wanted to be able to see. We're going to back all the way out to part 1, definitions of and abbreviations. And this is applicable to all of the regulations. So now let's go down. We're looking for rated or rating. Now, public aircraft. You can see some of this is OEI power. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is just stuff that is probably in the certification regulations. But right here, rating means a statement that as part of a certificate sets forth special conditions, privileges, or limitations. So rating in the context of, are you rated for an aircraft, means something that is part of a certificate, your pilot certificate. When you get your complex endorsement, is it printed on your pilot certificate?
Nope.
Nope. And it's kind of, they give it away in the naming of, complex endorsement.
Yeah.
It's an endorsement. It's not a rating.
Yep.
So the things that get printed on your pilot certificate, like airplane single engine land or instrument airplane, those are ratings. And the endorsements are not ratings. So now that we've figured out what the rating part means, let's jump back here into part 61. Gonna have to scroll down again. Okay. So the way we read this now is we can pretty much start right here. Logging in pilot and command flight time. We're going to skip over the stuff that's irrelevant. Private pilot may log pilot and command flight time for flights when the pilot is the sole manipulator of the controls of an aircraft for which the pilot is rated. Now, is any of this other stuff even relevant at this point? Here's how we check that. So you can see we've got these little I's, basically small Roman numerals here. And at the end of every one, we've got a semicolon, except for before this last one, number 4. Look at this word right here. It's an or. As long as that is an or, that means you only have to satisfy one of those subconditions. So that's it. We've told the story now. We are able to log that flight time.
Yep.
So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah,
Now,
for sure.
I will tell you, there's another thing that you can look up. And this is don't argue with me. I've been arguing about this subject for way longer than a lot of people. But this is also something that is a really good reference. So it's not at an easy URL like ECFR.gov. So I always just Google search FAA Chief Counsel, not counsel like a group of leaders, but counsel as in lawyers.
Lawyers.
COUNSEL interpretations. And you can see it was coming up before I even finished there, but okay. So interpretation search. Now what we can do is we can put in a keyword, and you can type in something like PIC or log or, the problem is you'll get a lot of results on those. Mm-hmm. So one thing that's easy to search for is just search for the regulation that you're looking for. So let's do 6151E. And that got it down to 2 pages. So, 2 results. Now this one, the Herman interpretation, was actually requested by a friend of mine, Jason Herman. In fact, he was on an episode of the Pilotcast quite a while ago.
Yep, I remember.
So, hey, Jason, if you're listening out there, hope you're doing well. What you'll see these letters that are written from the FAA to the people who request these interpretations. And anybody can do that. So it says he requested clarification concerning the logging of pilot and command flight time under 14 CFR 6151E for flights conducted in complex and or high performance airplanes. Sounds like the question that we were just looking at, right?
Yep.
Your letter presents a scenario in which a pilot who holds a private pilot certificate with an aircraft single-engine land rating but does not have endorsements for high-performance or complex airplanes required by 14 CFR 6131 E&F to act as a PIC, note the word act, again, that we talked about earlier, is flying in a high-performance and complex airplane. Another pilot who has those endorsements is acting as the PIC for the flight. Your letter asks whether the pilot lacking the endorsements may log PIC time for the time that the pilot is the sole manipulator of the controls. Does that wording sound familiar?
Yes, it does.
Your letter also asks a similar question in the context of a pilot lacking these endorsements logging PIC time during a training flight. The response that follows applies to either scenario because the regulations that govern the logging of PIC time whenever a pilot is the sole manipulator of the controls of an aircraft. So whether you are getting instruction or just flying around with a friend, doesn't matter.
Yep. Yep.
So Section 6151E governs the logging of PIC time and states in relevant part that a sport, recreational, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to reread the whole thing there, but it does say right here, the term rated as used in Section 6151E refers to the pilot holding the appropriate aircraft ratings, category, class, and type if a type rating is required. And these ratings are listed in 61.5 and placed on the pilot certificate. And then it references another interpretation. 6131 E and F establish additional training and endorsement requirements before acting as a PIC of a complex or high-performance airplane, respectively. Although these endorsements are required before a pilot may act as PIC, they are not required to log PIC time if the pilot is rated for and is the sole manipulator of the controls of the aircraft. So you're hearing a lot of those same words again. You know,
Right.
they're
Right.
being very clear about, you know, rated and sole manipulator and all that kind of stuff. But here's where the whole don't ask it to make sense thing comes in, and the difference between logging and acting. There is a distinction between logging PIC time and acting as a PIC. For a pilot to log PIC time, i.e. sole manipulator of the controls, a pilot must be properly rated in the aircraft by having the appropriate category, class, and type ratings. For a pilot to act as a PIC, i.e. the pilot who has final authority and responsibility for the operation and safety of flight, and you'll hear those words in 61.3 and a bunch of other places in the regulations as well. Pilot must be properly rated in the aircraft and be properly rated and authorized to conduct the flight. So in your example, being properly rated and authorized would include having the endorsements for complex and high-performance airplanes as required by 6131 E and F. Accordingly, in your examples, the pilot may log PIC time if that pilot is properly rated for the aircraft, even though that pilot does not have the required endorsements to act as a PIC. So basically, that's the letter from the FAA that says all that stuff that I just said before is true.
Yep. Exactly. I
And
actually
so when
have
you
a recent.
have a question about stuff like that, it's really a good idea to go and search those FAA interpretations, because there are certain times where something isn't necessarily clear to a layman, and it's always good to see what the lawyers at the FAA have determined is, you know, the real meaning of the regulation.
Yep. I actually have a quick story where this is very relevant. A few weeks ago, a friend of ours took us on a flight in his great little Arrow that he owns with a few other people. We went up for breakfast one Saturday morning for up to the high country in Payson. And Merrick, my middle son, who is a private pilot working on some of his other ratings, he does not have a complex endorsement, and an Arrow is a complex airplane, but he flew for, 0.5 or 0.6 because our friend allowed him to, fly the airplane, get a feel for it on our way back down. And when we got back, I said, you can log that 0.5 or 0.6, however long you were sole manipulator of the controls. And he goes, yeah, but I don't have it. And I explained this to him so that, he was able to log that time, because he is time building right now. He is trying to gain experience and get time. So the interesting thing about that is technically so I've got a follow-up question for you based on that scenario. I told you I was going to throw some curveballs at you. So even though that airport was more than 50 miles away, can he now log that as cross-country time, even though he did not do the takeoff and landing?
So you're wondering what he can log.
He can log PIC,
Correct.
but can he log it as PIC cross-country? And that took a little
Negative.
digging for us to figure out. Yep. Yep. That's right.
So I believe, let me go back to the interpretation search here. And I don't know why, but I know all the people who ask these dumb questions. They aren't actually dumb questions. I'll say that. But okay, Van Zanen. All right. So, one thing I'm going to do first is go back to our definitions here at the top of part 61, because that should give us a clue what this interpretation is going to say. So what is the definition of cross-country? Let me ask you that, Bill. What's the definition of cross-country?
Well, it depends on why you're logging it. So that's the important thing, is if you're logging it for experience requirements to obtain other ratings, then there are definitions based on that. If you're logging it because you want a record of your flying, then that's a different standard, right? And that really means going from one place to another, anywhere. That would be a cross country. But if you want to use it for example, experience requirements for getting an instrument rating or for getting a commercial certificate, then it has to meet certain requirements. And the standard requirements for cross country for most of those certificates has a definition.
Yes. Now, let me show you what the basic definition is here. Cross-country time means, except as provided in paragraphs 2 through 5, or 2 through 6 rather, time acquired during flight conducted by a person who holds a pilot certificate in an aircraft that includes a landing at a point other than the point of departure, and that involves the use of dead reckoning pilotage, electronic navigation aids, radio aids, or other navigation systems to navigate to the landing point. So,
yep, no mileage requirements, no, specific requirements, but
yes,
there is
and
a
we'll pause
requirement.
there. So the 2 through 6, if we look at those, 2 is for the purpose of meeting aeronautical experience requirements, except for rotorcraft, for a private pilot certificate. And then you'll see here's the 50 nautical mile requirement that people are talking about. Right. For a sport pilot.
But I did want to go back to what you read as the basic definition. It does say landing.
Yes.
Right? Landing at the airport. And so as soon as we got
key.
Yep, as soon as we got to that point, then it was clear that my son could not log that as PIC cross-country time, because he didn't even perform a cross-country flight because he was missing a key element, and that's the landing at a place that was different than the point of departure, I should say.
Exactly.
But then those other criteria come into play, but in this case, they're irrelevant because he's already been disqualified from being able to log that.
Right. And yeah, these are basically for all the different types of pilot certificate. Now, I have a suggestion. This has no legal basis whatsoever. It's just making it easier for people. So if you want to, you can certainly mark down any flight where the takeoff and landing are at different places as cross-country right from the very beginning. Right. However, when you're working on your private pilot certificate, your instrument rating, and your commercial, those all have the 50 nautical mile requirement. Yep. And you're going to have to total up the greater than 50 nautical mile cross-country for filling out your forms that you fill out to apply for the new pilot certificate.
Oh,
yeah. For the Checkride. Used to be Form 8710 when it was on paper, but yeah, whatever the electronic equivalent is, IACRA, I think.
IACRA, that's right.
So, yeah, to make it easy to fill out your IACRA, don't bother logging the shorter stuff early on.
It's just going to make your calculations more difficult.
Yeah. So I think generally after the commercial, as long as you have that landing elsewhere, you're good. So if we scroll down here just a little ways, number 6 here for the ATP certificate, it's straight line distance more than 50 nautical miles from the original point of departure, and that involves the use of dead reckoning pilotage, electronic, blah, blah, blah. So the ATPs don't even have to land somewhere else.
Right.
That said, that has to be more than 50. So I guess until you have the ATP, it's worth logging only that greater than 50. Now,
Right.
after that, nothing really matters anymore.
Yeah, log
and
whatever
so
you want.
you can log it all at that point.
Yep. Excellent. Well, we didn't even pre-plan that, but that little personal story kind of helped illustrate how you can get into a rat hole, and then you're demonstrating perfectly how you can unravel all of these things, peel the onion, and get down to the bottom of it. So that's
Yeah.
good stuff.
So this particular letter of interpretation, I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but basically what it says is that if you have 3 airports, A, B, and C, and none of them are more than 50 nautical miles from your home base, which is airport A, but airports B and C have more than 50 nautical miles between them, and you fly A to B to C back to A, because B and C have 50 nautical miles between them, if you log your flight from A to B separately from your flight from B to C to A, you can log the B to C to A flight as cross country and then not log the A to B flight as cross country. They just call that a repositioning flight. And so it kind of seems to go a little bit against the spirit of the regulations, but that's one of those questions where a lot of people ask, like, does each leg have to be more than 50 nautical miles and that sort of thing? And it doesn't. Like, you know, if you're working on your private pilot certificate and you want to hop to 10 different airports, none of which is more than 10 miles away from the last one, as long as one of those airports is greater than 50 nautical miles from your point of origin, you're good. All right.
Well, I've got a
So-
couple. I know we've got some more scenarios, but if we could step away from the regs a little bit, give everybody's brain a little bit of a break. I've got a convention or maybe a suggestion question for you. And this is a real scenario that's been coming up for me lately. As most folks know, I've been working on my CFI. I'm having a hard time. I'm ready for my check ride, but I'm having a hard time getting that check ride scheduled. So it's kind of dragging on for a while. This is not an uncommon problem these days. So I'm doing all kinds of flying, and a lot of the flying I'm doing, of course, I'm doing it from the right seat to continue to get more comfortable. And I'm taking my kids and anybody who's willing to be a guinea pig, and I'm teaching them things about flying. And so I've had the opportunity recently, for example, to take my son, who is already a private pilot, and introduce him to some of the commercial maneuvers, acting as if I'm his instructor. Of course, in this case, I haven't done my check ride, so I'm not a CFI yet. So we can't log it as dual, but I can certainly teach him, demonstrate the maneuver, let him try the maneuver, you know, those sorts of things, and give him feedback and act like I'm an instructor. And so that's what I've been doing. Now, in that case, because he's not logging dual and I'm not logging dual given, I am acting as PIC, but unless I'm demonstrating or doing the landing or something like that, I'm not able to log PIC time because he's logging PIC time as the sole manipulator of the controls. He's rated for the aircraft, so he can log that PIC time. Therefore, I can't. So that's been an interesting thing. So I've got a question for you on how you might fill out a logbook in this situation. So most logbooks have a column that says, I've got my logbook open, so I'm going to be glancing at it. It says total duration of flight. And this goes to the scenario I was talking about earlier when we went with a friend, flew to breakfast, and Merrick flew for part of it. I flew for part of it on the other direction. So what would you put in the total duration of flight there? Would you put the amount of time you're logging PIC where you were the sole manipulator of the controls, or would you put the total duration of the whole flight?
What I would put in there is the total loggable duration of the flight. And I actually have something in our notes here about things you can't log as well.
Loggable for you. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
So
It
there
would
are
in other
there
words,
are
you
two
would fill it
kinds
out.
of
You would fill it out so it matches your PIC time in this scenario that I'm giving.
Yes.
Yep.
So there are really two kinds of total time. There's total flight time and there's total pilot time. The only difference between them is simulator time.
Yeah. Right.
So essentially total flight time, which is in an aircraft off the ground, plus your simulator time would be your total pilot time. So, you can choose for your own convention. I have a ground trainer column in my logbook. Some would call that simulator. But, you can choose whether total duration of flight is pilot time or flight time. Just because the word is flight, I have chosen to log flight time in that column. And so if someone asks for total pilot time, including simulator, in fact, I've got an entry right here where you can maybe see that. You can see on that second line there, I have nothing in total flight time because I logged it over here on the simulator column. So that's that. Now, you probably are only putting in like a tenth or two of loggable time demonstrating maneuvers, right?
Yeah. We did like a 1.2. And because I'm also practicing demonstrating, I got 0.3.
Okay.
So I calculated how much time I was sole manipulator of the controls and logged 0.3 on this particular flight of PIC, and he logged the rest of it as PIC. I also did the takeoff and landing, so that was additional part of my 0.3.
Yeah. So I know that there are some people who will say things like, well, it's your logbook. You can log whatever you want.
Right.
And while that is true,
Yep.
to some extent, it also, you don't want to make it look like you're lying, whether you end up applying for a job someday or
Right.
you're having a chat with the FAA, maybe after a ramp check, maybe after an accident, hopefully not. But, if you have all this stuff in your logbook and you have been logging time given the columns that are in most logbooks, that's going to be a pretty uncomfortable conversation. Well,
Yeah.
why did you log this time in the 747 when clearly you're not rated for it?
Yeah.
Well, I like to log passenger time too. Well, yeah, don't put that in total time though.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there's another column too. Same question. I think your answer is going to be pretty obvious, but there's another column for, in this case, airplane single engine land. So category and class. So again, it sounds like you would log just the amount of time that matches what you're able to log as PIC since you're rated in it.
yes. And then, because, single probably doesn't matter that much, but you probably right next to that have an airplane multi-engine
Yes.
land column,
Yep.
and that
Yep.
one is going to matter. You will be asked about that for insurance paperwork and for applying for jobs and all that kind of stuff. So in both of those cases, if you have a flight that you would like to put into your logbook for memory purposes, let's call it, it's a flight that you want to remember. And frankly, there are times when you are getting some value from a flight, even if you can't necessarily log it.
Yeah.
And so in those cases, if you want to put something like that in your logbook, does your logbook have some blank columns in it?
It does. Yep.
Okay.
And I've written in
And I
things
think
like
pretty much all the
complex and high
logbooks-
performance, things like that allow me to keep track of that.
Yeah. So, looking in my logbook here, I've got single engine land, multi-engine land, blank, rotorcraft helicopter, as flight instructor,
Yep.
and the rest of them I would probably actually use. So what I would suggest, and I didn't start doing this until actually very recently. I was working for a Part 135 operator, and I was only able to log maybe half of my time or so because we were flying single pilot airplanes. And any time that we were on a Part 91 leg, or if we were on a Part 135 leg without passengers on board, there's no method for me to be able to log PIC or really log anything. And so I decided that what I would be doing with that is logging it under a new column that I call seat time. So if I was the pilot monitoring, not the pilot flying, and I was not acting as pilot in command of a 135 leg, then I would just log it as seat time. So my total time would be 0, cross country 0, landing 0, all that stuff. But seat time, I would put that in. So in your case, you could log 1.2 of seat time and 0.3 of PIC, for example. So,
right.
I feel like that is a method to make it very clear that, hey, this is time that wasn't necessarily loggable that I just wanted to have a record of.
Very interesting. So yeah, we got a little away from the regulations and more about convention and kind of best practices, but I thought that would be valuable as well. Along those same lines, Kent, what about in a situation where you hand the controls over to a buddy who's not a rated pilot at all?
So that is the 0 asterisk I was talking about at the top. Because guess what? You just handed the controls over. You're no longer the sole manipulator, right?
Yep.
But your buddy is not rated and can't log it either. So
0 pilots logging PIC.
Log it, right?
Yep.
But here's the asterisk. Someone asked for an interpretation on that one, and the FAA said, in that instance, it's okay if you log it, even if you're not truly the sole manipulator of the controls. So I don't have that interpretation handy here, but
it's almost like saying, let's not leave PIC time on the table.
Kind of. But yeah, I think that the FAA's view there was, well, in reality, you are still in control of the airplane, so we'll let you have that one. And as long as we're on the subject, let's talk about just the few different ways that you can log time. Let me go back to 6151 one last time here, hopefully. All right, 6151E again here. We're going to just quick tick off the boxes that will let you log something as PIC. So we've already talked about the sole manipulator rule a bunch. Number 2 here, when the pilot is the sole occupant in the aircraft. So student solo, that's the first time that you can log PIC, because if you are the sole occupant of the aircraft, you don't have to be rated. So I guess technically, what did they call that kid? The barefoot bandit, I think.
Right.
Who for a while there was running around the country stealing airplanes.
Mostly the Pacific Northwest, right?
Right.
Yeah, technically he could log it. Yeah.
Right. I don't think they're ever going to let him have a pilot certificate, but that's beside the point. So, third one here, and this is the one that is important for the scenario where you have 2 people logging PIC, where one is being the safety pilot for the other. So, number 3, when the pilot, except for a holder of a sport or recreational pilot certificate, acts as pilot in command of an aircraft for which more than one pilot is required under the type certification of the aircraft or the regulations under which the flight is conducted. So that covers a bunch of scenarios. If you are an airline pilot or any sort of pilot where the aircraft requires 2 pilots, then that's the part where it says where more than one pilot is required under the type certification of the aircraft. Now, I mentioned a minute ago flying under Part 135. So it says or the regulations under which the flight is conducted. So in the particular 135
including your
operator where I
charter,
was working.
right? For a
Right.
135. Yep.
Right. So in Part 135, it specifically says that 2 pilots are required on any leg with paying passengers on board. There is an exception to that some carriers have, and it's just called generally the autopilot in lieu exception, where if you have a functioning 3-axis autopilot, you don't need that second pilot. You do have to have op specs that allow your operation to use that autopilot in lieu. And we just specifically did not get that op spec because that's not how we operated. We always did everything with 2 pilots. I was able to log legs where I was not the pilot flying, as long as we had passengers on board, if I was the acting pilot in command. So those are the only 2 scenarios where the acting pilot in command gets to log it just by virtue of being the acting pilot in command.
But if you were not acting as pilot in command, and it was not your leg to fly, so you were not the sole manipulator of the controls, then you're not logging PIC.
Correct. There are no boxes I can tick at that point. In fact, I couldn't log anything.
Right.
And man, there's so many little sub scenarios you can start to get in off of these regulations. It gets kind of crazy.
We'll leave those for future.
Yes. In fact, we would love feedback if you have questions on whether you can log something. I guess while we're on the subject, well, we'll come back to that in just a minute. There is one more. Well, there's this number 4, which is more involved in training flights, and there's an ATP one down here. So if you are an ATP acting as pilot in command of an operation requiring an ATP certificate, you get to log it then, which is also kind of covered by that one we were talking about a minute ago. But this is the one that I really wanted to jump down to, is 6151E3. A certificated flight instructor may log pilot in command flight time for all flight time while serving as the authorized instructor in an operation if the instructor is rated to act as pilot in command of that aircraft. So there's plenty of situations where you can have 2 people logging PIC if one of them is acting as an instructor.
Yep. Well, if you're giving instruction, then you are required crew at that point. So.
Yep. So let's talk about the good old safety pilot thing.
The way that you can get 2 pilots logging PIC at the same time and you're not a professional pilot. That's the scenario we're talking about here.
Yeah. The safety pilot, if the safety pilot is the acting PIC, and this is important, the safety pilot must be the acting PIC for both pilots to log PIC. The safety pilot does not have to be the PIC to log it, period. So pay attention to who is the PIC and is responsible for the flight, because the safety pilot may be logging either PIC or SIC. And, it's more than just regulations that goes into that. So let's say you and I go flying in my airplane, and, I'm under the hood and you're my safety pilot. Well, are you on my insurance?
I'm
That's
not on the insurance.
Reason why, right. So in that case, I'm going to want to be the PIC because let's say I gear the thing up or something like that, and then you were the PIC. Well, now the insurance is going to deny that claim. Another thing would be, I was just thinking through the endorsements. So my Mooney is both complex and high performance. You cannot act as PIC on my airplane if you don't have those endorsements.
Right.
So,
right.
So those are a couple things to think about.
Yeah, you have to be qualified. You have to be qualified to act as PIC in that airplane, obviously, to act as PIC. Yeah.
Correct. So if it's not an airplane that you can go and fly by yourself, then you should not.
That includes I want to bring this up too. That includes medicals.
Yes.
So you have to have all of the requirements to act as PIC. Like you said, Kent, if you can't fly that airplane by yourself, you can't act as PIC.
Yeah. Now, a medical is required to be the safety pilot anyway, because you're still a required crew member. Medicals are not just required for PICs. I should say, though, the basic med now does qualify. For quite a while after the basic med rule first came out, you had to have a legit medical certificate. It was just due to the way that Congress wrote the law requiring the FAA to do basic med in the first place. They had not addressed that scenario, and the FAA had been dragging their feet on that whole idea for the longest time. And so they literally wrote the regulation exactly as Congress made them and nothing else. And that was probably the most glaring issue with the whole thing, was that, okay, now there's this whole scenario where I can fly the plane myself, but I can't sit in the right seat and look for traffic.
Right. Right.
But yeah, they did finally address that more recently. So
Did they address that with a regulation change, or did they address it with an interpretation?
that was a regulation change.
That was a regulation change.
So technically, an interpretation is never changing a regulation. It is merely a
but they can be
clarification of what the
ambiguous
regulation means.
that a regulation can be ambiguous enough that it has the same effect, though.
Yeah, to an extent. But yeah, this particular one, it was not ambiguous at all. It said, yeah, you need to have a medical. There was really the basic med rule didn't say that there was that exception. So
Right. Cool.
anyway, I don't want to get too far into the whole medical issue, but yes, to act as pilot in command, you need everything. You need the endorsements, you need the medical, you need all that stuff. So I think that if you can't fly the airplane on your own with friends in the back seat, you're also not qualified to be the acting PIC. That isn't to say that you can't be the safety pilot, but we've covered a couple scenarios here with insurance and endorsements and all that kind of stuff that you should be aware of. And you should also agree before the flight who the PIC is going to be, so that there's no ambiguity there at all. You need to know who is in command of that flight.
Right.
So, all that said, let's say you are the acting PIC safety pilot. Now we're coming down here to 6151E13, when the pilot, except for sport and recreational, acts as pilot in command of an aircraft. And I'm going to skip over the multi-pilot aircraft ones section of this here. An aircraft under which, or for which, more than one pilot is required under the regulations under which the flight is conducted. So there is a regulation. I can't remember the number right offhand, but there is a regulation that requires a safety pilot when you're wearing a fuel limiting device.
I'll put it up on the screen right here
that
so you can
is
see it.
the regulation under which the pilot is, or under which the flight is conducted. So let's drop down real quick to 6151F, logging of second in command flight time.
Right. That's just what I was going to ask.
Because if you're the safety pilot and you cannot be the acting PIC, you may still log the time. It will just be second in command time. So 6151F1 is talking about multi-pilot aircraft. 6151F2 is the pertinent regulation here. So starting up at the main text here, a person may log second-in-command time only for that flight time during which the person holds the appropriate category, class, and instrument rating if an instrument rating is required for the flight. If it's in VMC, it doesn't require an instrument rating, right? For the aircraft being flown, and more than one pilot is required under the type certification of the aircraft or the regulations under which the flight is being conducted. So, again, there is that regulation saying that you need the safety pilot. So that is the regulations under which the flight is being conducted. And again, here you see this word or before the last subsection. So at the end of number 2, it says or, which means you only need to check one of these 3. If any of those 3 are true, you're good. So
Very
hopefully
cool. Very
that all
cool.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, I do want to suggest one more thing. I talked about an extra column for seat time. I also have put in an extra column now for acting pilot in command time. And the only reason for that is there are certain airlines who disagree with the FAA on what should be logged as PIC, but they are not the FAA. So I'm going to log in my logbook what the FAA says to do. But I have seen instructions on airline applications that say, for pilot and command time, we want you to fill out only the time where you were the acting pilot in command of the flight. So I have also added an acting PIC column.
Have you gone back and filled it all out for your previous career?
Yep, I have.
Oh, that's a lot of work.
Actually, it wasn't that hard. Well, so what I did is I went through the aircraft that are in my logbook. And some aircraft, I know I was never the acting pilot in command.
And some you always were. Yeah.
Friends who let me fly their planes and stuff like that, but they were always with me and that sort of stuff. There are some aircraft for which I knew I was always the acting pilot in command. And then there were, some aircraft where it could have been either or. So
right.
I just automated the whole process and said, okay, we'll do a VLOOKUP here and check the tail number against the list here and just check on whether that aircraft was an always, a never, or a sometimes. And
that's interesting. And tell me how you've done that in your Foreflight logbook, your electronic logbook.
So Foreflight lets you put in custom columns. Let me actually go to Foreflight logbook here. All right, so under settings, you can see here all of these ones at the top with check boxes are columns that Foreflight includes, and you can decide whether to display them or not. So you can see, for example, I don't have the night vision goggles checked because I have never flown with night vision goggles. And
unfortunately,
yeah, sounds like it'd be kind of cool, right?
That sounds pretty fun to me.
Yeah, so you can see down at the bottom here, I have 4 custom fields. And then there's this little new field link that you can click.
Yep.
And just create a new field. Let's do that for the heck of it, because I want to pull up the types you can do. You can do text, numeric, hours, counter, date and time, or toggle. So you can have just a on-off.
Yeah.
So those are the options for your custom field types, but you can have, as far as I know, they don't have a limit on the number of custom fields, but I would check on that if you're going to do a ton
of them.
Because there may be a limit.
That would be hard to manage anyway, so I would stay away from that if you can.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that I did notice is when you have a custom field, in Foreflight, they always put the button once you fill in the total time. A lot of the other ones will have a little button that appears that says use 1.5 or whatever
Yes.
you put in for the total time.
Yes.
The custom fields don't get that, so you do
They
end
don't
up
have
having to
that.
manually key it every time.
Yeah, I was thinking you could almost make that column, the one you were just talking about, a toggle field. And if you ever had to add up your total PIC where you were acting PIC, you could just look up the total duration of the flights where that was toggled on.
Yeah.
So you could filter
And let me
it by
show you
that
how this
toggle.
looks too. To build my experience report here. Those custom fields it does by aircraft type. So this is Foreflight's standard experience report. And when you have the custom fields, if you come down here to the bottom, it shows each type of flying that I have in, acting PIC, Part 135, and seat hours are all done by aircraft type. There is the totals at the bottom here.
Very cool.
But yeah, that's what that looks like.
Excellent. Well, Kent, any other last things you wanted to say about this vast topic?
I think we have pretty well beat that one to death. Like I said, there are a bunch of little tiny exceptions and asterisks and stuff like that that you can get into on this. And so, please don't automatically go and start logging everything as PIC just because you heard two random guys on a podcast tell you to. Make sure that you can actually back that up by reading the regulations that we've pointed you to, reading interpretations. And you know what? If you have a question, by all means, send it in and we'd love to answer it.
We like to do the research too. Call us crazy. All
yes,
right.
we are that kind of crazy. And please, FAA, don't take our medicals away.
Excellent. Well, Kent, this was an awesome topic. Certainly needed. I know that there's always a lot of confusion about this, and a lot of this discussion helps me personally to wrap my head around some of these scenarios that pop up. When you get a lot more experience in your career, things are going to pop up that you're thinking, haven't seen this before. And so these are the types of things, especially showing people how to go find the regs, to find the interpretations, and kind of make their decisions based on those. So appreciate this. Great topic, great coverage of the topic. You never cease to amaze me on the depth of knowledge that you have on some of these things. So thank you very much. This was cool.
Yeah, this was fun. It's always fun to geek out about this stuff.
All right, Kent. So we'll see you next time on Beyond the Checkride. Thanks again.
All right, we'll see you.